Hey, this is Patrick, and today we're going to talk about different steam radiator air valves and their sound characteristics. So here we have three different air valves that can attach to the side of radiator to release the air before the steam hits it and it closes. So we have Maid-O Mist, we have Vent-Rite, and then we have a Varivalve. Each of those valves have their own pluses and minuses. In essence, my favorite valve of those three is this one, and the reason for this is because it's relatively quiet valve, and then also it has a replaceable orifice right here. It just screws in and screws out, rather screws out and screws in. And then the whole valve usually comes with a set of, I think, 5 or 6 of those valves in different sizes, and that's very useful so that you can control steam venting speed. In theory, this is even cooler valve because all of that kind of screwing in, screwing out is being taken care of by this bottom part. The unfortunate thing is that, and the unfortunate thing for the loudness of this valve is that this orifice right here always stays the same size. So even though you're controlling the amount of venting with this valve, with this dial, but you do not control the loudness. Or you can control the loudness, but in essence, by definition of physics, because of a small top opening right here, this valve is quite loud when it releases air. And then you have this valve right here, that's a Varivalve. And again, in theory, it's supposed to be a fantastic valve, partially because its opening is actually the long slot. So because of that, it doesn't have the sort of problems that round openings have. It's like a whistling sound. But and also it's adjustable, so you can control the amount of air that's being released from a quite high extreme amount of air to very small ones. But the problem is that when it closes, it doesn't fully close. So no matter, even when it's closed, it actually releases still a little bit of air. Another problem with this one is that so those valves, when they fail, and they all fail, all those valves at some point fail. If you buy 4 of each, I basically guarantee you that probably one of them is not properly working. How do you know? Well, very simply, when the valve's supposed to close, the radiator is hot, then you're still seeing hot steam being released through one of those openings. This valve also closes in such a way that the internal part detaches when it goes in and out through its heating cycle many times, and then it gets stuck. So it's constantly this valve right here, the ball at the bottom. It's not ball in the actual mechanism, but something like a ball falls down, and then the what's called the valve never has a chance to open. So in that sense, the radiator with those valves might stay cold, and there's a reason for this, because that ball is at the very bottom, so the valve cannot release its air. This valve fails. Well, actually, of all the valves, this is relatively not particularly prone for failures. The failure might happen is that it might be not so calibrated that you can totally close it or open it. But in essence, if you're kind of working with the mid-range of the valve, that it's actually quite a reliable valve. The valve with this valve fails by this float right here. Sometimes detaches, and then all of a sudden, because of that, the spring cannot fully close the float, close the opening when it extends, and then all of a sudden the valve keeps on releasing steam and never closes. Now let's talk a little bit of the sound qualities. So by definition of physics, when you push the air to a small opening, then you increase speed of that air moving through it, and then there's something turbulence and God knows what else. And because of that, when the air is pushed from the radiator through one of those openings, it will create sound. I think it's kind of strange how some people claim that steam heat is silent heat. There's always a little bit of sound to it. Actually, one of the best YouTube channels is called Silent Steam Heat. So I'm kind of curious why he actually ended up naming it. I guess maybe it's all relative, that silent. In my understanding, is purely quite very silent, and you don't hear any air going in and out of those through those valves. But in essence, if I was going to rate those valves based on loudness, I would say this is the loudest vent, this is second loudest, and this is the most quiet. However, that's not the only aspect that you have to deal with when you're dealing with those valves, which is the amount of air that's being released and the amount of the waste, how the valve can release of the condensate causes the valve to, besides the loudness of the air passing it, it also adds certain gargling, which means the air pushing through a little bit of pools of hard water collecting at the bottom of the valve. So this valve right here, it's relatively, despite being quite loud, it doesn't produce too much gargling effect. This is a mid-range. Sometimes you hear a little bit of gargling inside the valve, and this is a big offender that tons of gargling. And I would say the biggest amount of spitting of the again, spitting is relative in time. It's not like a vomit, but rather like a few droplets sometimes appear here and might fall on the ground. So in that sense, this valve has the best mid-range loudness performance in terms of mixture of the actual air being released through the valve and the gargling. This is the loudest gargling valve, and this is the loudest air release valve. And yeah, that's our conversation about the steam heat air valves.